Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. They mocked her in court, without knowing who she was. On Monday morning, the court of Fulton County, in Georgia, teemed with activity like an overflowing beehive. The air was heavy with tension, crumpled papers, heels clicking on the cold floor, and interrupted conversations. Hurried lawyers crossed the corridors with files in hand, their faces tense, their shoulders hunched by the pressure of cases often lost from the start. Defendants with tired features waited, some trembling, others resigned, their hands clasped like students awaiting the sentence of an invisible professor. The judges, encased in their robes and institutional fatigue, entered without emotion, like human clocks wound up for another day of summary justice. Amidst this hubbub of routine, the smell of cold coffee, anxious murmurs, and bureaucratic indifference, a black woman silently walked through the courthouse doors. At first, she attracted no attention. She was unaccompanied, wore no badge, uniform, or flashy costume. She seemed to have no armor other than her calm. She moved slowly, without haste, as if each step were perfectly measured. She wore an impeccable navy blue suit, with clean, simple lines. Her discreet black shoes seemed chosen not to seduce, but to assert a quiet elegance. Her hair was carefully braided, raised in a braided bun at the nape of the neck, like an assumed heritage of her roots, and a silent declaration of her discipline. His face expressed neither anxiety nor anger. He was calm, almost impassive, but his deep black eyes swept the room with a sharp lucidity. It seemed as if she saw everything, without trying to be seen. And no one, in fact, saw her. Not a single security guard greeted her. Not a single clerk looked up. To them, she was just another presence among many. Another dark figure in a place where so many others come every day to implore justice or bear the burden of an accused son, brother, or husband. In a corner of the room, 3 uniformed police officers were talking loudly, as if they ruled the room. They laughed among themselves, a light, arrogant laugh, worn by the habit of unchallenged power. They wore their bulletproof vests slightly open, their hands on their belts, placed there as a constant reminder of the authority they believed themselves to embody. One of them, the Officer Mark Hensley, a white man in his 50s, with a slightly prominent belly and a shifty look, said, discreetly pointing at the newcomer with his chin, "Look at her. Another one who's going to cry in front of the judge to save her son." Snicker. A dry, greasy laugh. By his side, Agent Brett Collins, younger, jaw clenched, chewing gum between his teeth, continued. "Or maybe she cleans the hallways. They hire women like that every day." The third policeman, Danny Powell, said nothing, but he didn't react either. He smiled, looked away, and continued to type absently on his phone. Helena Brooks had heard them. She didn't jump. She didn't frown. She didn't turn her head abruptly. Instead, she slowly looked up at them, just for a moment. That look was devoid of violence, but he wore unfathomable gravity. The kind of look a seasoned soldier gives a noisy opponent, unaware of his own weakness. The police officers looked back at her briefly, then looked away, unsure why they had felt, for a moment, uncomfortable. Helena walked to the back of the room. No one gave up their seat. She didn't ask for it. She sat down on a wooden bench, straight, with the exact posture one acquires during years of military training. She calmly opened her bag, took out a discreet-looking but thick black folder, placed it on her lap, and waited. She waited without impatience, like a woman who knew exactly why she was there. His name was Helena Brooks. Born at Montgomery, in Alabama, in a neighborhood where the sidewalks were cracked by time and injustice. She was the only daughter of Anita, a hospital nurse, and Leon Brooks, a former soldier who returned from Vietnam with visible scars and others he had always hidden in silence. Helena had grown up watching her mother work 2 jobs to feed the family, and her father cry secretly when he heard the national anthem. She had seen friends disappear, brothers arrested, teachers give up. But she had also seen black women resist, dignified, upright, strong as the roots of ancient oaks. As 17 years old, she had joined the army. To go out, to fight, to serve, not those who looked down on her, but those who counted on her. 30 years later, she had become Division General, the first black woman to lead a strategic division of the U.S. Army Cyber Command. She had advised 3 presidents, overseen covert operations against hostile powers, negotiated with the NSA, with the Pentagon, with foreign allies. She spoke 4 languages fluently, and she had received the Distinguished Service Medal, the highest distinction for exceptional service. But that morning, in that local courthouse, none of that mattered. Sun's silence and his skin color had been enough to erase all her medals, all her diplomas, all her missions. She had been reduced to a nameless silhouette, to a walking prejudice. But what they didn't know yet is that silence can sometimes announce the noblest storm. As 10 o'clock sharp, the heavy doors of the court opened again. The Judge Robert T. Mallory, a white man in his 60s, his face marked by years of legal proceedings, made his solemn entrance. He sat down behind the solid wood lectern, gently tapped the microphone, then looked around, immediately imposing calm. The clerk, a man with graying hair and a tired appearance, stood up slowly and said in a clear voice, "The court calls the case, United States v. David King." A murmur circulated among the spectators. The matter was complex. David King, a former government agency employee, was accused of orchestrating multiple cyber attacks targeting sensitive infrastructure, endangering national security. The Ministry of Defense had dispatched a renowned expert to testify. The clerk paused, then announced in a slightly louder voice, as if to emphasize the solemnity of the moment. "The court calls Major General Helena Brooks." A slight shudder ran through the room. Conversation stopped. The hubbub of the corridors, the clicking of heels, the strained breathing of the accused. All of it faded away. The 3 police officers, who had been talking just a few moments ago, froze. Officer Hensley, whose mocking gaze had weighed on the woman in the blue suit, suddenly lowered his eyes to the ground, unable to face the reality that had just presented itself. Brett Collins, he looked away from her, carefully avoiding meeting Helena's eyes. The black woman, who had been sitting in the shadows at the back of the room, stood up with quiet determination. Her body, straight as an eye, slowly crossed the space. Each step resonated with an almost solemn force, like a drum announcing a truth that could no longer be ignored. Silence, suddenly heavy, enveloped the room. Arriving at the witness stand, she calmly placed her file on the lectern, sat down, and faced the room. The eyes, previously absent, were now fixed on her. The murmurs fell silent. The federal prosecutor, Michael Grant, young and visibly impressed, walked towards her with palpable respect in his voice. "Madam General, thank you for coming all the way from Washington." She gave him a slight smile, almost a tribute to the solemnity of the moment, and replied in a clear, calm voice, "Duty has no distance, Mr. Prosecutor." For nearly 20 minutes, she delivered a masterful presentation. She spoke about cybersecurity, Russian infiltration, sophisticated algorithms, and top-secret military protocols. Every term was precise, every sentence the fruit of expertise honed by years of service at the highest levels. Her voice, calm and assured, resonated with the echo of a life dedicated to protecting her country. In her eyes was the glint of a woman who had seen too much combat to be impressed by a local court, but who carried the heavy burden of being a pioneer in a world that had not always reached out to her. Then, just before leaving the bar, she stopped. Her gaze rested on the judge for a long time, then slowly swept the room, capturing everyone's attention. In a more serious tone, she asked permission to speak, and the judge, intrigued, nodded. "Go ahead, General." She then turned to the 3 police officers who had ignored, mocked, and underestimated her. Their silence weighed like a challenge. She spoke slowly, each word slamming out with the force of a hammer blow. "When I walked in here this morning, some thought my presence was unnecessary, even inferior. They saw a black woman, alone, with no escort or visible insignia. They thought I was just another figure in this courtroom." She paused, the room hanging on her every word. "I didn't respond to their words because my self-respect is stronger than their ignorance. But I am not an exception. I am living proof that, despite humiliation and prejudice, a black woman can serve this country at the highest level without losing her humanity or her honor." His gaze hardened, but the sincerity and nobility of his speech filled the room. "What I demand of my soldiers, I demand of all of you here. Respect, regardless of appearance, gender, or skin color. Never forget that." A poignant silence followed his words. The weight of his message hung in the air. Judge Mallory, usually so reserved, put down his gavel, looked up at her, and whispered, "Thank you, Madam General." The police officers, taken aback, exchanged furtive glances, their arrogance shattered, their ignorance confronted by a dignity they could no longer deny. This courtroom, had just experienced a moment in history, a powerful reminder that true power lies not in uniform, but in truth, respect, and integrity. The next morning, the city's apparent calm was shattered by a leaked video, discreetly captured by an anonymous spectator in the courtroom, showing Helena Brooks walking with dignity to the stand and then delivering her powerful speech. The video was titled, "Black General Humiliated by Ignorant Police Officers Teaches Them a Lesson in Dignity." Within hours, it had made the rounds on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, shared thousands of times, accompanied by comments of admiration, anger at the police, and impassioned discussions about systemic racism. The national media, alerted, began to investigate the identity of this woman with her unwavering presence. The Army quickly confirmed that it was indeed the General Helena Brooks, divisional of the U.S. Army Cyber Command, a heroine recognized for her key role in delicate international negotiations and for having overseen major cyber defense operations. The journalists also revealed his decorations, Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, and several other prestigious awards. A portrait emerged, that of a woman forged by years of struggle, hard work, and resilience. Her story, as the daughter of a dedicated nurse and a Vietnam veteran, born in a modest neighborhood in Montgomery, became an inspiration to many. In a few days, Helena became a national symbol, a standard of dignity and the fight against ignorance. But the most immediate consequence was professional and institutional. The officer Mark Hensley and the agent Brett Collins, whose derogatory remarks had been picked up by other witnesses, were immediately suspended after an internal investigation. They were transferred to administrative functions, far from contact with the public. This gesture, although welcomed, was not enough. Faced with the shock wave, the Georgia Department of Public Safety announced the establishment of immediate mandatory training on racial bias, stereotypes, and respect for diversity, intended for all police officers and administrative staff of the state. Experts in social psychology, the history of discrimination, and conflict management were called in. This measure, long awaited by civil rights groups, marked a significant step forward in the fight against institutional prejudice. But Helena refused the spotlight. Back in Washington, exhausted by the media intensity, she declined all invitations to TV shows, public debates, and press conferences. She didn't like the noise. She preferred action. A few days later, in the hushed calm of her secure office, she received an unexpected visitor, a young black recruit, Amaya Johnson, 22 years old, fresh out of the military academy. Her eyes shining with admiration, Amaya asked him sincerely, "General Brooks, why didn't you react right away in the courtroom? I think I would have stood up, screamed, maybe even exploded." Helena smiled, a sweet but wise smile. Because sometimes silence is a more powerful armor than any explosion. She placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. When you know who you are, what you stand for, you no longer need to prove anything. You don't need to shout to be heard. You assert your presence, your value, simply by your existence. Amaya looked at her, captivated. You shook an entire courtroom that day, without even raising your voice. Exactly, Helena replied. True strength lies not in anger or violence, but in self-control, patience, and dignity. This is how the most important battles are won. She caught her breath. That day, I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I simply existed with grace and authority in a world that wanted to ignore me. Helena stood up and looked out the window at the American Capitol stretching out at her feet. And that day, they learned.